Man's life on earth has only one end and only one purpose: to identify himself with his eternal self, and so to come to intuitive, unitive knowledge of the divine ground.
I work here in Tucson and Pima County for a rather large law enforcement agency which prefers to remain unnamed. The reason being that my boss is a little sensitive about the subject of UFOs. But I'm retired military. I spent 27 years on active duty in the Army. And my service experiences tie in very closely with my involvement with the UFO phenomenon.
And now, last but not least, my good friend, Colonel Bob Dean.
Thank you. First of all, I don't know how to tell you how gratifying it is for me to be sitting around a table with so many illustrious and respected researchers, dedicated people. I never expected that I would ever have that honor to be here with a group like this, and I find it extremely gratifying. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. For those of you who didn't hear my presentation, I retired from the military. I've been a researcher for 40 years. I celebrate my 40th year as a UFO researcher this year. I've spent 27 years on active duty in the military, and most of those 27 years I also dug into the research into the UFO phenomenon. Sometimes I pushed myself to the very edge of the security regulations by looking at things and finding things and examining things I probably really had no business to look at. But having been assigned with one of the highest security classifications that you can have, it was my pleasure and honor to be able to see some material which convinced me many, many years ago that this phenomenon was not only real, but it was a lot larger, more vast than any of us had dreamed back in the 60s. During the first week of May 1991, an unusual gathering of world-renowned researchers took place in Tucson, Arizona. They came together in an attempt to establish a worldwide research network to address the serious scientific problem of the UFO phenomenon. Recognized and professional individuals from many varied disciplines assembled together to share information, research techniques, video films, photographs, and first-hand reports by recognized scientists and senior military experts. Meeting together were scientists, journalists, historians, retired police and military officers, and an Italian publisher who is also a vice president of the Fiat Motor Company. Notably present was Colonel Dr. Marina Popovich, world-famous test pilot who was from the Soviet Union. Each and every individual present repeatedly stressed the gravity of the current situation and urged their various governments to not only release the facts, but to make a concerted effort to educate the people of the world in an effort to prepare them for a major extraterrestrial contact that will very likely occur in the near future. Prior to ending the Congress, a roundtable summary was held by representatives from the 14 nations, stressing their concern and pledging their commitment and support to the establishment of an ongoing worldwide network, where each individual and organization will closely keep in touch and continue to share information. And anyhow, the sheriff, or the county manager, is sitting there smiling sweetly at me and saying, you know, we have a high regard for you, Bob, but we're not going to let you have the manager's position. But we're going to give you this other job with a nice pay scale and all the rest of it. I says, no. You know, that's not acceptable to me. I applied for a position and a scale in accordance with regulations, followed the procedures. I went through the whole hiring procedure. I deserve a chance at that job. So Mr. Cerna says, well, I'm sorry, the sheriff has some misgivings.
And he says, by the way, do you know what some of his misgivings are? And I says, no, the sheriff has never called me in and talked to me about this at all. I says, I have no idea why I'm not being considered for this position. And he says, well, Clarence Dupnick and I had a long talk. And he says, you know, you've been involved with UFO research. You're a recognized individual here in Tucson and Pima County. You were on television once or twice. It's come to his attention that you're involved in UFOs, and he simply cannot bring himself to appoint you into this highly regarded manager's position because you've been involved with UFOs. Well, this was the first I really knew that that was an issue, because Clarence had never talked to me about it. The major had never mentioned this to me. I did not know at that point that that was a sore point with Clarence Dupnick. So anyhow, I walked out of the county manager's office, somewhat disappointed and a little bit ticked off, to be honest with you. I'm an old soldier. I was trained and brought up in the infantry. And this was rubbing me in the wrong direction, if you'll understand what I mean. So I proceeded to file a charge with the state Attorney General's office, the Office of Civil Rights. I filed a formal charge with that organization, and an entire process of investigation was begun on that level. Violation of my civil rights, a violation of all of the rules, the procedures, just total violation of the ordinances and everything. So that investigation proceeded. Now time is passing, by the way, and I'm still working at the Sheriff's Department. Now once I had filed the grievance, the temperature changed over there. Subtle little things began to happen, like my mail and distribution did not arrive. People would send me letters and invitations to conferences and speaking engagements, conferences I should have been attending. That's because I was an emergency services professional plans and operations officer, but some of the stuff would not get there. And if it got there at all, it would arrive a week after the conference. You know, subtle little things like that. People would call me, and I have a feeling maybe that's what happened, Carl. I'd get phone calls from people who would never get to my phone. And people would say, I tried to get a hold of you the other day, and I couldn't get through. You know what I'm talking about? These little subtle little, feel this itching in the middle of your shoulder blades back there. Well, it got cold as hell in the Sheriff's Department. Once I filed the grievance and once I filed the charge with the Attorney General's office, it got cooler. And it became awkward. It became a little embarrassing. It got to the point that during other conferences, I would see the sheriff across the room, or I would see the major, and I would wave. Because I had known these guys for years, and I had worked for them. And I would raise my hand and wave and say, hey, hi, how you doing? And they would look away. They didn't see me. You know, it was like I wasn't there. Little subtle things like that. And I used to think, there's no damned excuse in the world for this. I did not earn this. I don't deserve this. And by damned, I'm not about to put up with it. The old sergeant major in me began to come out, and I says, I've had enough of this garbage. So about the same time that the state Attorney General's office concluded their investigation and found in my behalf that indeed it appeared that my civil rights had been violated. Now this is the second professional investigation in total support of my charges and grievances. About the same time, I'm expecting the county manager and the sheriff to come around and say, well, we may have made a mistake here. Let's shake, kiss, make up, be friends, forget it all. That didn't happen. I finally decided that I've had enough of this garbage, and I got a hold of one of the best top guns in town. I hired the toughest, meanest, most rotten attorney I could find. A gentleman that I was referred to by a number of people who said, if you really want one of the best hired guns in Tucson, Ron Stolken is the man for you. And I find that a lot of people don't like Ron, but they have a high respect for him as a professional lawyer. So I went down to see Stolken and I laid it all out in front of him, and he said, "We've got a case." And again, thank you for inviting me back. If I remember correctly, last time we chatted together, I was filling you in on my incredible series of experiences with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. We touched upon the fact that I had been denied a promotion because of my interest in UFOs. And I had to go to court. I had to get an attorney. I had to take out a second mortgage on my home. And I had to fight Sheriff Dupnik in court. And this thing lasted 2 full years. And as many of you may remember, 1 week before the jury trial, the Sheriff's Department decided they didn't want to go to trial on this issue, and they settled with me out of court. Just for those of you who weren't here the last time, I ended up getting everything I asked for. I got the job, I got the title, I got the retirement, all of the good things that I should have had 2 years before, plus a rather nice little sum of what they call tort damages, which were paid for by the taxpayers, by the way, which I wasn't at all happy about, but that's the way the world is. And I want to take the opportunity at this moment to introduce to you an old friend who many of you know, a man that I've admired and respected for years, who has done his homework, who has worked hard in these trenches, a man that I think is one of the most honorable and decent people I have ever known, and I would like for you to give a big hand for Wendell Stevens.
I'm going to tell you something about Bob that he probably is not going to tell you. I met him 20 years ago when I moved to a new location here in Tucson. He lived around the corner from me. We met at the offices of APRO, where he was a senior member of the board there and was for the whole 20 years. We worked together on many projects, with Bob working on one side in silence because he was working for the Sheriff's Department at the same time and worked an entire career and retired from there also. And I was working in other directions, and we were comparing notes all along. So this man is very well informed, and he's been in this for a very long time, and he hasn't missed much, so listen closely.
Thank you.
I gotta get to my table.
Okay, thank you very much. I had always been curious about the UFO matter, but I was a skeptic. A curious skeptic, which is a good place to begin. I remember when I was first in the military in 1950 that the UFO issue was becoming a matter of some concern to a lot of people. A number of things had been happening throughout the world. There were some issues in the paper. There was some incidents taking place that made people begin to wonder what the hell was going on. But I was very skeptical about most of it because I had not seen any evidence. In 1963, I was privileged to be given an assignment to Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe, which we called SHAPE.
Our own government.
There was never cosmic in the United States Air Force.
We do have it now?
No,
We
there
do
was
not.
not.
Okay, well, I've been told that we do have a cosmic level in Washington. But at the time, cosmic top secret was the highest level that the NATO SHAPE headquarters had.
You're saying they still have a cosmic
It's
in
still-
NATO?
I had the highest clearance you could possibly have in NATO. I had a cosmic top secret clearance. Now, there are people who've told me that no such clearance exists. Well, I don't pay any attention to them. Cosmic top secret existed and still exists, and now we even have it here in our country. And I must tell you very bluntly, I have no patience with skeptics who are not willing to open their minds and study the evidence. And I've dealt with a few of the guys in the Psychops group, Jim McGaha from Davis Mountain Air Force Base, as an example. So the Air Marshal instituted this study in 1961. And General Lemnitzer, who was the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe at the time, who was the man I worked for, gave his approval. And they began a study that took 3 years to determine really what was going on here. And when that thing was published in 1964, and I had a chance to see it in its final form, I was stunned. Because as I said, literally the information in that study changed my life. When I got to SHAPE in 1963, I learned of a study that had begun in 1961. It had been initiated by the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, a gentleman by the name of Air Marshal Sir Thomas Pike, General Lemnitzer's Deputy Commander. Air Marshal Pike was a British Royal Air Force hero, World War II, and he had initiated a study which they titled an assessment. And its subtitle was an evaluation of a possible military threat to Allied forces in Europe. This SHAPE NATO military study was established because we and the Soviets had almost gone to war with each other almost a half a dozen times over one strange series of events. Large, circular, metallic objects flying in formation at very high altitudes, at a very high rate of speed, sometimes clocked from 1,500 to 5,000 miles an hour, and very obviously under intelligent control. Now, for a long time, the Soviets thought those objects belonged to us. And for a long time, we thought they belonged to the Soviets. And as I said, we were armed to the teeth, and we were facing each other down across the Cold War borders there. And this matter of these objects flying at their own choice at any time, day or night, going wherever they would at high altitude, high rate of speed, flying over the Soviet zone, flying over the Warsaw Pact, spinning over France, Germany, turning in formation over the English Channel, and disappearing off of our radar somewhere over the Norwegian Sea, off the coast of Norway. Copies were given to the French military commander, to the German military commander, to the Italian, to the Danish. All of the major military involvement at SHAPE headquarters got one copy. Now, Air Marshal Pike was determined to find out just what these objects were and what the hell was going on here. Because they were obviously under intelligent control, they were very high, very fast, and they were doing things that we could not do. So, he had asked London and Washington for information on these objects, figuring that they needed all the information they could get. Interestingly enough, they were getting nothing out of London and Washington, because an interesting little piece of history at that time is that there was a large French spy ring operating in Paris, where everything that was sent to SHAPE and NATO forces in Europe from either London or Washington was going directly to Moscow, to the KGB. This spy ring, if those of you who are interested in history can read a little bit about this in Leon Uris's very, very well done book titled Topaz. I must tell you that that book is accurate and true. It deals with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It deals with this incredible spy ring that was going on in Paris at the time. We're dealing with something that's bigger than many of you people might imagine. What we're really dealing with here is a far beyond series of things, beyond extraterrestrial visitation. We're not just dealing with extraterrestrial visits from high technology civilizations. We're dealing with visits from people who are probably multidimensional. We're dealing with experiences that are very likely involving time travel. And we're not dealing just with extraterrestrial, we're dealing with cosmic level, intergalactic kind of communications. And the evidence for this is literally overwhelming. And your government, good people, you taxpayers who pay the bills, know most of this. And that's the reason the implications are so sensitive. That's the reason that they've had to put the lid on it, and they've kept the lid on it for over 40 years. The study itself was approximately 1.5 inches thick. But it was supported by 6 to 8 inches of annexes. There was this much material available that backed it up and included studies, analysis, photographs. It was an amazing piece of work. I was impressed by it. I had been involved in work of this kind before, but this was one of the most complete, comprehensive studies I have ever seen. During the 3 years of the study, they had farmed bits and pieces of this out to some of the top people in the world. They had spent an enormous amount of money. They had gone all over Europe and England to the finest brains and minds they could find to try to determine what the hell was going on. And they found that there was a lot more going on than anyone had ever dreamed. I want to make something very, very clear. I have always thought of myself as a loyal American, and I always thought of myself as a patriot. I devoted my life to the military service, and I was willing to die for my country. And I was willing to die for my Constitution, and I still am willing to do that. I was a loyal Cold Warrior for all of those 27 years, and I have never broken my national security oath on any matter in any way over all of those years. But I have begun to break my security oath only in the last year and a half on this subject, and in this subject only, because from what I've learned and from what I've learned that other people have learned, ladies and gentlemen, this is indeed the major issue of our time, and I'll try to explain to you why. So I am purposely violating my security oath, and for those of you in the audience who are retired military, and some of you who may still be in the service, understand that I'm not doing this lightly. I'm doing it intentionally from a feeling of love for my country and for my Constitution. Because there are things that you need to know about, there are things that you should be told that you are not being told. And you not only have a right to know, you have a need to know. And it was a complete, thorough study. And let me tell you a little bit about what they concluded. They became convinced that something absolutely incredible was happening. And many of us who were involved with it and had a chance to read it concluded that not only were we dealing with something that was incredible, I thought we were dealing with something that was absolutely beautiful. The idea, the confirmation of all of my dreams as a young man when I was reading all that science fiction, the idea that it was true, that it was real, and we were dealing with extraterrestrial intelligence. To me, it was one of the most exciting things I ever got involved with. But when the thing finally came out, there were about 4 major conclusions. And I'll try to remember these if I can. The first one was that the human race and the planet Earth has been under an extensive, detailed survey and analysis by several extraterrestrial civilizations for a very long time. Now that is a mind grabber in itself. The conclusion reached this study that this has gone on for not only hundreds of years, but perhaps thousands of years. And remember, I said several extraterrestrial, high-technology civilizations. The conclusion stated that there appeared to be some kind of a program or a process taking place. It was developing. We had studied it for a long time. We'd looked at it in great detail, and it was very apparent to the experts that something was happening here that was a planned, developing kind of process. Now, where that was going to lead and what the eventual outcome would be, they didn't know. Essentially, it's this, that the interaction, the interrelationship, the coming and going from intelligences from out there has been going on this planet for a very, very long time. According to Zecharia Sitchin, it probably began in earnest about 200,000 years ago. And it's been going on continually. It could have been going on from the very beginning. We're talking about intelligences and races out there that probably were advanced technological societies before the human race even existed. Now try for a moment to imagine what a life form, an intelligent life form, might be like if it's 1,000,000 years ahead of us, or even 100,000 years ahead of us, or for God's sake, even 10,000 years ahead of us. Look what we've done in a very short time. There are a lot of stuff we've done that I don't even want to point to, but we have done some good things. in a very short time. And we're doing good things right now. Finding 2. These civilizations have demonstrated an extremely advanced technology, possibly hundreds or even thousands of years beyond ours. Another finding was that there seems to be a process or a plan of some kind unfolding, that they have demonstrated that a development of some kind of program was underway. The evidence indicated that this program has been going on for an extremely long time, possibly hundreds or even thousands of years. And I've concluded after another 30 years of study that it may have gone on a lot longer than that. Exactly. They concluded that there was no military threat involved because if there had been, it would have all been over. The degree of technology that was demonstrated was so far beyond anything we had that if there had been malevolence or hostility, it would have all been over. When this finding was shared with most of the top generals at SHAPE headquarters, the impact was pretty impressive. I was excited as hell. Some of the top generals were devastated. One general in particular was a man that I knew and respected, a fellow by the name of Robert Lee, who was a 4-star American Air Force general who was General Lemnitzer's air deputy. When General Lee read the report and studied the conclusions, his deputy told me, his aide said, the old man was wiped out. He unbuttoned his blouse, he threw his hat across the room. He had a cup of coffee and he sat back and he says, my God, do you know what this means? Everything we've ever done, everything we've got, all that we have, is meaningless. The conclusions of this particular study were made by the Supreme Allied Commanders themselves at SHAPE headquarters. And at the time we had an American general in charge, General Lyman Lemnitzer. The British had an air marshal who was the deputy Supreme Allied Commander. Every major member of NATO at that time that was involved with military alliance had their top people involved. Once the conclusions were reached, once the study was completed, they sat down and analyzed what they had. And they made the conclusion that there was no military threat involved. And this was all real, and it was all serious, and something was happening. And then they made their report to the Secretary General of NATO. I was so damned excited by it, I couldn't put it down. Every chance I got when I worked in shock, and I used to work there a lot, and I used to work there sometimes more than I should have. It's a wonder that I didn't cause people to be suspicious of me, because the only way I could go in was into shock, sign the document out of the vault, sit there in the operations center and read it. Well, I used to be the most dedicated guy you ever saw. I would spend 2 or 3 evenings a week in there reading this document, damn near memorizing it. My point is that it was a mistake from the very beginning to take the UFO phenomenon and put it in the hands of the military. They were the very wrong people to deal with something this important. I think I've got some conclusions here after 30 years of additional research that I'll throw out in front of you. I want you to understand something else. I am not proselytizing up here. I am not on a crusade. I am not an evangelist. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. What I'm asking you to do is to inform yourselves. Dig into these issues, get into the evidence, learn what's available out there, and become knowledgeable about what's happening. In 1976, when I left the service, we knew at that time that there were 4 separate civilizations that were coming here, that were intimately involved with us. And I say intimately, I'll go into a little more detail on that a little bit later. One of the most fascinating aspects of that conclusion was that one of the groups, one of the 4, looked exactly like we do. And to the point that they could put on a coat and a tie, a sweater, a blouse, and a dress, and sit next to you in a theater, or sit next to you on an airplane, or sit right beside you in a restaurant, and you would never know. and that they appeared to be concerned enough with this initial contact to sort of try to gently bring us to the point that, hey, think about it, fellas. Because there was an abduction of a Danish farmer, for example. He was taken for a ride in a ship. Excited, the old man, had a ball. He came back babbling and excited and bubbling. There was an attempted abduction of an Italian Air Force sergeant. There were contacts taking place all over the NATO-shaped area of responsibility. And they were all benevolent, they were all benign. In every case, the contacts were made by human beings. There were case after case after case of that, where they apparently were trying to tell people that there was no threat involved, there was no fear here, there was no hostility here. It seemed to me at the time that they were trying simply to let us know what was going on. We had a number of cases where we had objects hovering over shape headquarters. There was one case where there were 300 or 400 people standing out at the lunch hour watching an enormous cigar-shaped object hovering over shape headquarters for about 30 minutes. I happened to see the old man at the same time, and he was looking up, and he looked around to see who else was seeing it. And my God, people were having lunch, the clubs were going, people were coming and going. Just at that hour where there were a lot of people out there, the old man looked around and saw everybody else looking up. He smiled, nodded, says, "It's one of them, all right." And the generals were upset about that. Being paranoid, as we were all trained to be, they thought, my God, we could have them walking up and down the corridors of shape headquarters here. Good Lord, we could have them walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. And then some smartass said, yes, we could even have them in the White House. That really upset everybody. And they began to look at each other. But it concluded that out of the four, one group were typically human, perfect humans, just like us. You'd never know the difference. One group was described as being very much like some of the little grays we've seen. During the crash in northern Germany, when they retrieved 12 small bodies from a 30-meter disk that crashed in northern Germany, all of the 12 little bodies were little gray fellows. But the conclusions that the NATO study reached were very much like the conclusions that our own Defense Department people had reached, is that the little gray guys may not be entities in their own right. They appeared to be clones of some kind.
Like a plant life?
Well, they were all identical, absolutely identical. When they were doing the autopsies on these little guys, I mean, they couldn't find any differences in them.
More like biological
They're like
robots
laboratory
or,
products.
Yeah,
or
They're
clone off a plant.
that they're biological androids, that they are all clone products. That it appeared interesting and unusual that in the crashes, and there were several, that in every case, the retrievals involved little gray bodies. Never in the study that I can remember even touching upon did they ever mention that human beings crashed. Apparently there is one group that comes here that does have a definite reptilian characteristic. From the contacts, first face-to-face contacts, people have seen them, talked to them, and they do have some sort of a lizard-type skin. And what's interesting is that the pupils of their eyes are vertical, which you find in many reptiles. But they're humanoid in the sense that they have 2 arms, 2 legs, hands, head, ears, but they do have a definite reptilian characteristic. Now the other group were humanoids, but they were very tall, very large. And I don't know, they don't have any hair. They sometimes run as much as 8 feet tall, and they have round faces, no hair at all, but they're humanoids. Now they couldn't sit next to you on an airplane without you wondering who the hell that was. But that was the 4 separate groups. The large humanoids with no hair, the little gray fellows with the large heads, the reptilian group, which are about human size, 5.5 feet, 6 feet sometimes. And these have been seen all over this country. And this is one of the bigger secrets in Washington, that apparently some of these groups are affiliated in some form, in some kind of a, I don't even know whether to call it a federation. You know, we all watch Star Trek. We're intrigued by that idea. But some appear to be involved with each other in some way, that there's some kind of a planned program that they are working together on and cooperating on. I'm told that there is now well over a dozen separate groups out there, and that there is indeed a program underway to condition people to not only deal with facing these people, accepting them, but just the idea that we're not alone. What's exciting to me is the intelligence behind different forms of life, the advanced intelligence, the spiritual connection there. Because most of these intelligent beings have a very highly developed intellect and spirituality. Now, there are varying levels. Some of the guys are not apparently very nice, but that doesn't mean they're malevolent and hostile. Some of them that come here don't have evidently a high regard for the human race. Well, there's some humans I know that don't have a high regard for the human race. A famous astronomer some years ago by the name of Haldane made a statement that's being quoted in the books over and over and over again, and he said to his colleagues, he says, "The universe is not only stranger than you imagine, it's stranger than you can imagine." It became quite apparent, and this annex in the assessment touched upon that, the religious implications, the shock, what it's going to do to organize churches on this planet. Now, I must tell you, and this is one of the things that I'm very strongly working with, Brady. I'm very deeply concerned about this, the impact on people. The true knowledge of what this is all about, what's been going on for a very long time, this intimate interrelationship we've been having with extraterrestrial intelligence for God knows how many thousands of years, is going to have an impact on organized religion.
Yes, it will.
On this planet. And I'm not talking about just Christianity. I'm talking about every major religion on the planet. One of the major signs of intelligence is curiosity. The higher the intelligence, the higher the level of curiosity. That's what I like to share with people. Of course, now what does that say about the human race? Apparently there is a movement taking place where science and philosophy and theology is beginning to come back together again where it belonged in the first place. Because ancient philosophers, astronomers, astrologers, theologians were all the same kind of open thinking minds. Well, as you know, during the last 200 years, science went this way, philosophy and theology went that way, and as they say, never the twain shall meet. Well, they're coming back together. That I've concluded myself after many years of study is that the Vatican knows a lot more about what's been going on than you would imagine.
I'm sure they have their own CIA.
I've discussed UFOs with Jesuits, and they're among some of the most well-educated people in the church.
Yes.
And I've talked intimately with Jesuits about this subject and the religious implications. And many of them agree with me that we know about it, that it's real. We've known about it for a very long time. And there even are people in the church who realize that what happened at Fatima and Garabandal and many of the other so-called holy religious experiences were UFO experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the implications here are literally mind-boggling, earth-shaking. I mean, this is one of the major points that I've been trying to make over the years, and I'm going to stress it tomorrow night. You go beyond the hardware, the reality of that. You go beyond the fact that there are extraterrestrial intelligences here. We know they're here. They've been coming. We got evidence. It's overwhelming.
That's right.
But the subject that intrigues me the most, that I'm really trying to stress the most, is the spiritual impact. What it means to the human race. The fact that we are not alone. The fact that we are not threatened, that there is no major threat here. That we're going to come to a point very soon, and I'm saying sooner than most people realize, where this is all going to come out. And the spiritual implications, in my view, are 99% of it. I have concluded, and as I said, I'm not alone in this finding. I find myself a member of a large group of professional people who've reached the same conclusions. That the human race is clearly a hybrid race. We have been seeded on this planet, and we have been genetically manipulated on this planet by high technology extraterrestrial intelligence for thousands and thousands of years. As I said, there has been an intimate interrelationship going on from the beginning of recorded history. But consider this. Every major philosophy, every major theology, every religion on this planet has had basically the same beginnings. If you go back far enough, and you weed through all of the mists of time and history and go back to the origins and the beginnings, not only of Christianity, but of Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, every great religious philosophy, the human species from the beginning of recorded time has had the same basic teaching. And I've been a student of history myself, and I've studied the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've studied the Nag Hammadi materials. And I appreciate impeccable scholarship. And what I've been able to piece together is that Professor Deardorff has spent many years and devoted his skill and ability and his professional training into one of the finest pieces of scholarship that I have seen. And I'm thinking that if this document does turn out to be what it's supposed to be, that it's going to be an earth-shaking document that's literally going to shake the foundations of Christianity. And the reason I'm saying that this item is so important is that many of us have been convinced for a very long time that not only are we biological products from an advanced intelligence genetic program, but we have an intimate involvement with these intelligences, and every major religious philosophy on this planet from the beginning of recorded history has been initiated and engendered by these advanced extraterrestrial intelligences. They were responsible for the foundation of the Hindu religion. They were responsible for the Judaic traditions and the Judaic religion. They were responsible for Christianity, because Christianity would never have made it without their intimate involvement. They have been responsible for the origin of Zoroastrianism in Persia, and they are responsible for Buddhism. This advanced extraterrestrial spiritual intelligence has been intimately involved in our growth and development from the beginning of our history. I was excited when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Many of you may have done some research of your own in that area. I was exceptionally excited when they found in 1945 the Nag Hammadi material in Egypt, the ancient true Gnostic philosophies, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Miriam of Magdala, the Gospel of Peter. Some of that material is earth-shaking in its implications. I want you to understand one point here. None of this threatens the basic philosophy of Christianity. None of it is endangering the teachings of the carpenter from Galilee. What it does in my mind is it adds to the story. It throws light on it. It incredibly illuminates this subject, where to me it makes a lot more sense. Now, many of us have known for a long time that what we have in our modern Bible is not the original sources. They've been edited, they've been added to, entire chapters have been taken out. The church fathers over the centuries have, let's be honest, played rather freely with some of the books in the Bible. The four Gospels that you find in the New Testament today are what remained after the church fathers got finished a number of centuries ago. But my point is this, that illumination and truth is a constant, ongoing process. And seeking the truth and learning the truth is part of each and every one of our responsibilities. Not to be told, not to be led, not to be preached to, but to open your own minds do your own research and inform yourself. As the old Gnostics of the 2nd century said, know thyself. Look deep into yourself, because in my point, you are immortal spiritual beings. You go back to the beginnings. The same essential story is told by every one of the great religious founders of those religions. Jesus of Nazareth said essentially the same thing that Krishna said in India.
Right.
They almost were reading from the same text. As a matter of fact, if you compare some of the works in the Bhagavad Gita, it's almost word for word from some of the statements that the carpenter from Nazareth gave at the Sermon on the Mount. Now, this is no accident, and this is no coincidence. We're dealing with some very important information here, and it's time that we pay attention and grow up and address this. This is powerful, powerful stuff. This is why most of the governments on this planet have not had the courage to release some of the findings they have come up with and release it to you people, because they have concluded that you're not mature enough, intelligent enough, or stable enough to accept this information and deal with it. The material is there. It's available to you in the libraries. Inform yourselves. To quote a very dear man who is no longer with us, James McDonald, who used to be the chairman of the Department of Atmospheric Physics at the University of Arizona. A dear man, a brilliant man. Jim McDonald said one time that if you're not interested or concerned about the UFO matter, you're simply uninformed. But you can inform yourselves, and you've got to do so, because some of the things that are going to be happening to you and to your country and to this world in the next few short months and year and a half maybe, are going to be overwhelming unless you have informed yourself and become knowledgeable about what's going on, what's actually taking place, and what does it all mean. Because when it all begins to happen, and I'm not making this up, your lives will change forever. Your world will change forever. Nothing will ever be the same again. Oh my, we're running out of time as always. I've got some stuff that I need to share. This little book is available. It's republished continually. It's a jewel. It's worth its weight in gold, and as you can see, my little copy is just falling apart on me. It only costs a couple of bucks, whatever. It's a mentor religious classic, the Bhagavad Gita, which translates in Sanskrit as the Song of God. This is, to the Hindus, what the Holy Bible is to the Christians. The world is a place of preparation where one is given many lessons and passes many tests. Choose less over more of it. Be satisfied with what you have, even if it is less than what others have. In fact, prefer to have less. The world is not bad. On the contrary, it is the field of the hereafter. My God, those words are so true. The world is the field of the hereafter. What you plant here, you will reap here. And I must go on and tell you that what you plant here, you will sometimes reap somewhere else. Because you're reaping stuff now that you planted a long time ago. The world is the way to eternal bliss, and so is good. It is good. In spite of the pain, the blood, the misery, the heartbreak, the world is good. On the 1st of March, 1994, is the 2000th celebration of the carpenter's birthday. And I'm looking forward to that day because I think we're going to have some pretty exciting things taking place, because it's going to be the end of his era. It's going to be the end of his age. He was born under the sign of Pisces. In the Piscean age, he heralded the Piscean age. He brought it in. We've lived through it for almost 2,000 years. And on the 1st of March, 1994, we're going to celebrate his 2000th birthday. Your government, in its infinite wisdom, and I use that term with tongue firmly in cheek, has learned and is involved with certain scientific projects. Either some stuff that they've learned themselves and experimented with, or stuff that they've learned from the visitors. I'm not sure which. I think it's a little bit of both. But we have scientific things taking place that you would not believe. And if you think the aliens or our visitors or our friends from whatever dimension or whatever time and place they're coming from have some interesting things to share with us, we're doing some of it ourselves right now. There is a place in the southwestern United States on a vast, enormous military reservation in the state of Nevada where you can walk into a room and you can walk through what appears to be a large doorway, and it's a device. It's a scientific device. And there's enormous power involved. Enormous power. And you walk through that door in that room, which is about 1,000 feet beneath the surface of this facility. And guess where you come out? You come out in Pine Gap, Australia, which is a test facility, as a secret as Groom Lake and Site 51, which is jointly operated by the Australians and the Americans and the British. And at Pine Gap, there's this another doorway. And they call them the portals. And the guys that have been through the thing says, I can't believe it. It's cold in Nevada, and we go into the room and we walk through the door and we come out and it's hotter than hell in Pine Gap because it's summer down there when it's winter up here. And Pine Gap is in a facility that's in the middle of an enormous national security agency facility that's run primarily by your government. But the Brits and the Australians and the New Zealanders and the Canadians work with us on this. It began years ago when we had an experiment in Philadelphia that didn't work too well. Now the experiment worked fine, but the guys involved didn't come out of it very well. The apparatus is excellent. We lost a lot of guys.
What, we're back in time?
Yeah, the time displacement, the doorway. Von Neumann was the primary scientist behind it. We were experimenting with time displacement. We were experimenting with time dilation. And we succeeded in ways we didn't even understand. It worked, but it was not good for the kids involved. We lost a lot of them, and a lot of them went insane. But von Neumann worked out the chinks and the bits and pieces, and it worked, and it's working fine. And the doorway in Nevada is part of it. Not only do we go in a doorway in Nevada and come out in Australia, but we now know, and this is a fact, God, I wish I had another hour to share this. We have experimented in going back and going forward. Not only are we doing it psychologically and hypnotically, because we've learned that that can be done too, but we're doing it physically. And of course we've known for many years that some of the things we're seeing do come from time. David Froning is a brilliant scientist who worked for many, many years with McDonnell Douglas under a contract with NASA. And Froning had a lecture at the University of Arizona here about 5 years ago, which I was invited to. And he walked in with an armful of papers. You know, scientists publish papers. And if you get a bunch of them together, they all have their papers. And they say, I'll give you some of mine if you give me some of yours. And all of these physicists from all over this part of the world were there in that room at the university listening to David Froning. And Froning got up to the blackboard And he says, let me tell you some things that we're doing. Not things that we're thinking about, but things that we're doing. We're dealing with transluminal flight. And I did the same thing. I went faster than light. We have ships. We're working with ships. We're experimenting with vessels that hold men that are dealing with transluminal flight. And so this old piece of garbage that you keep hearing from certain scientists saying space travel is utter bilge, it won't happen, it can't happen, they can't get far from here, or from here to there, or from there to here. Garbage. They're going all the time. And according to Froning, and these scientists are sitting back there listening. Now these are men that are tops in their field. And he said, if I were a scientist in a laboratory and I was asked to design the most ideal, perfect, physical shape for travel and movement through any kind of an atmosphere or any kind of a substance, he said, theoretically I would have to come up with one specific shape. And he says, any scientist would end up with the same thing. And he says, surprisingly enough, here it is. And what it is a disc. A circular, disc-shaped, round object. And Froning went even on to say, and he says, nature has even shown us that in our system. You take a red corpuscle, and you put it under a microscope, and you look at it, and what do you see? That same shape. And he says, aerodynamically speaking, in any medium, whether it's water or air or time, it's perfect. So I want to apologize if I have seemed like I've rambled and random things here and there. I've had a purpose and I had a goal here to share a few basic things with you that I've learned, that I feel are valid, that are important, that are real. But more than anything else, it's not that I'm a teacher or a preacher or on a crusade. I'm not preaching a sermon. I'm simply sharing with you some things that I have learned, things that I consider to be real, valid, and true. Timeless and eternal. And I'm telling you and I'm asking you, you can do it. We all have one single basic common beginning. We are all made of the same stuff. And that is star stuff. We are children of the stars. Don't forget that.